He was born on that being May 1895 in a quiet village near Fulda in what was then Hesse-Nassau, Germany. His father was a schoolmaster. In their home, faith and learning mattered. As a young man, he carried books instead of rifles. He became a teacher, gentle, patient, the kind who refused to cane children. He believed in kindness, dignity, respect. Simple things, maybe, but real. Then war came. In 1914, nearly 19, he volunteered for the Imperial German Army. He fought on the Eastern Front, in Flanders, the Baltics, Romania. The war was brutal. In 1917, he was seriously wounded. He received the Iron Cross for his service. In the quiet that followed war's end, he returned to teaching. He married a woman named Anne-Marie Krummacher. Their life together was modest, rooted in faith and small lessons in trying to heal. He lived, taught, cared, a man shaped by books and chalk dust, not by propaganda and uniforms. And yet, he was German. The land he loved had changed. The times were shifting. He looked at the promises of rebuilding, of pride, of a new order. He joined the youth movement that sang folk songs under stars, that believed in renewal. There was a tension inside him, the schoolmaster, tender, humane, and the patriot, longing for meaning. It was a quiet tension then, a soft ache in the heart. But it would grow, and soon it would force him to choose. The air over Poland in September 1939 carried a strange mix of dust, smoke, and disbelief. Trains groaned across occupied towns, and German columns pushed forward as if nothing could slow them. Among those men was Wilm Hosenfeld, now 44, wearing a uniform that felt heavier with each mile. He had been drafted into the Wehrmacht in August of that year and assigned to guard duties after the invasion. He first served near Pabianice, just southwest of Łódź. The camp there was meant for Polish prisoners of war, though camp barely described the misery he witnessed. Cold barracks, thin rations, faces drained of hope. Hosenfeld was no stranger to hardship, but this felt different from the front lines of the First World War. This time the suffering was not the chaos of battle. It was organized, deliberate. In letters home, he wrote cautiously, knowing censors would read every line. Still, small truths slipped through. Hints of shame, hints of worry, hints that the country he served was turning cruelty into policy. By early 1940, he was transferred to various administrative roles around Łódź and later to Warsaw. Each move pulled him deeper into the machinery of occupation. He watched how homes were seized, how families were pushed into forced labor, how Polish teachers, priests, and community leaders were arrested. He had been a teacher once. He knew what it meant to silence a classroom, to break a community from the root. The weight of it pressed on him in ways he never admitted aloud. And yet something in him resisted. Quietly, almost shyly, he began offering small help, a kind word, a safer assignment for a worker, a moment of mercy when orders encouraged none. They were small gestures, barely visible, but they tested the edges of what a soldier was allowed to feel. Those early months in Poland marked the first cracks in the uniform he wore. He could follow orders yet, but not close his eyes. Soon the occupation would tighten. Warsaw would become its own kind of prison, and his uneasy conscience would face choices far more dangerous than these early timid acts of kindness. He arrived in Warsaw in July 1940, assigned to the guard unit of Wachbataillon 660. Soon he was given an odd, almost civilian role as sports officer. He ended up running a Wehrmacht sports school in Warsaw, overseeing physical training, military athletics, events. In a city choking under occupation, the stadiums and sports halls felt absurdly out of place. But Hosenfeld used that absurdity to create small spaces of mercy. He had power to employ people, to manage facilities, to write passes. In that role, he quietly began offering jobs to Poles, to Jews, to anyone who could stay hidden under the radar. Among those he sheltered was a Jew named Leon Worm, who had escaped a train bound for the death camp Treblinka. Hosenfeld gave Worm a false identity and a job at the sports school, against orders, under danger. He helped others, too, both Jews and non-Jewish Poles, catching them before the Gestapo could, issuing false labor passes, giving them a cover inside his unit's walls. Sometimes a piece of paper, a job, a coat could become a shield, while around him the city spiraled into oppression, ghettos sealed, families torn apart, fear pressing on everyone. Hosenfeld kept a strange calm inside. He sent letters, kept private notes. In his diary he spoke of guilt, horror, shame at what his country had begun to do, but also a stubborn belief. Even in war, compassion must not vanish. So the German captain in uniform became, for some, a hidden haven, not a savior in robes or myths, but a man making quiet choices. Every forged document, every offered job, every hidden face in the crowd was a small act of resistance. When others looked away, he didn't. And for some, that made all the difference. He walked the streets of Warsaw, often, usually early in the morning, when the city was still tired from another night of fear. The cold would cling to the bricks, and the silence felt heavier than footsteps. From late 1940 onward, the walls of the Warsaw ghetto rose higher each month, brick by brick, topped with barbed wire. Hosenfeld saw them on his way to duty, stretching along Kładna Street and farther north, cutting the city in half. He knew what those walls meant. People sealed in, futures sealed shut. By 1941, he had witnessed enough to understand that cruelty was no accident here. It was policy. Hunger was policy. Disease was policy. Names disappearing from work rolls were not mistakes. Inside his diary, he wrote of Schuld, guilt, and of a growing shame that his uniform forced him to stand closer to the violence than any decent man should. His entries from this period describe beatings, shootings, and the faces of children starving behind walls. These were not distant rumors. These were scenes he passed on his own route each week. Then came the summer of 1942, the Grossaktion Warschau. Between 22nd July and September, deportations from the ghetto to Treblinka ran day after day. Hosenfeld knew the trains did not lead to resettlement. Too many people vanished, too many whispers from soldiers who had seen the pits, too many wagons returning empty. He later wrote that these months crushed something inside him, whatever part still hoped the war might hold to some shred of morality. He tried to intervene when he could, a forged pass, a warning, a discreet job assignment before someone's name was added to a transport list. He knew he couldn't stop the machinery, but he kept placing tiny wedges into its gears. The more he witnessed, the more his private resistance hardened. In letters to his wife, he spoke cautiously but clearly enough, calling the treatment of Jews a crime against humanity, and saying he feared judgment would fall on Germany for it. These were not words spoken lightly in 1942. A wrong sentence could cost a life. Some nights he walked alone near Alehia Jerozolimsky, watching smoke drift above the ghetto. The fires lit the sky in muted orange, and each time it struck him, this was a city being punished for simply existing. By the end of that year, he no longer questioned whether he should help. The real question became how far he could go before someone noticed. A decision like that doesn't shout when it arrives. It settles in quietly, like a truth you can't keep pushing away, and once it settled in him, it didn't leave. The summer of 1944 turned Warsaw into a place of ash and echo. On 1st August 1944, the residents of the city, exhausted, hungry, frightened, rose up under the flag of the Armia Krajowa, AK. They hoped to free their city, even for a moment. For 63 days they fought with what little they had. Buildings once full of life became battlegrounds. Fires roared through streets. Tanks crushed barricades. Every block felt like a choice between hiding and fighting, between hope and despair. When the uprising failed, surrender came on 2nd October 1944. The price was dreadful. Somewhere between 150,000 and 180,000 civilians lay dead. Many fighters too. But death was only the beginning of the horror. After the surrender, orders came not just to suppress Warsaw, but to erase it. Families were forced from homes. More than 650,000 people were deported to a camp in Pruszków, then sent off to forced labor camps or worse. Special units, engineers, demolition crews, squads of SS moved block by block. They blew up buildings, set fire to homes, dismantled churches, schools, theaters, libraries. By the time Foreign Eyes returned in early 1945, the old city, with its streets, its memories, existed only as ghost-like ruins. Estimates say 85% to 90% of buildings lay destroyed. In the cold January of 1945, when Soviet troops finally walked into Warsaw, they found not a capital, but a wasteland of rubble and silence. Amid that disaster, some souls tried to survive in the dark, hidden in basements, cellars, behind walls that had once been homes. Among them was Władysław Szpilman. The city around him was gone, but his heart, fragile, shaken, still beat. And somewhere in the ruins, a uniformed face saw him, a German officer who had once worn rank and orders. The city had fallen, but something like mercy was still alive. Rain had turned the ruins of Warsaw into mud and broken memories. In November 1944, a German officer, Wilm Hosenfeld, moved through the ashes and empty buildings, ordered to prepare one as a headquarters. In one of those abandoned houses at Aleja Niepodległości 223, he heard something unexpected, a soft, uncertain piano note. That single note changed fate. Inside a dusty attic, under rubble-smeared beams, was Władysław Szpilman, gaunt, starving, almost a ghost among ruins. Captured by surprise, he was asked by Hosenfeld to prove he was a musician. With trembling hands, Szpilman sat at the battered piano on the ground floor and pressed the keys. He played a piece by Frédéric Chopin. In that broken room, the music hung in the air, fragile, human, defiant. Hosenfeld listened, and he believed. Nothing heroic in grandeur, no speeches, no dramatic declarations. Just a coat for warmth, bread and jam to ease hunger, and a secret space where Szpilman could breathe for a few more weeks. Hosenfeld helped him find a hidden attic loft, providing a ladder, supplies, cautious silence. For several weeks, as Warsaw burned and froze outside, the German officer slipped food and clothes through shadows. In that small corridor between fate and mercy, a choice was made. A soldier chose humility over orders. A man chose compassion over cruelty. Hosenfeld did not tell the world. He merely left when his unit withdrew, leaving behind what he could: food, a coat, hope, sealing a secret that would survive long after war, long after walls fell and guns went silent. What does it mean to save a life with a coat and a piece of bread? In that moment when a piano played amid stones and ash, it meant everything. The attic was colder than Szpilman expected. The November wind slipped through every crack in the roof, brushing against his skin like a warning. After weeks of hiding alone in the ruins, his body had turned thin, his hands shaking even when he tried to stay still. And yet for the first time in months, he wasn't completely alone. Hosenfeld returned quietly, usually near dusk, boots softened by caution, breath held, until he knew no one else was near. He brought whatever he could: a loaf of bread, a jar of jam, potatoes, sometimes a can of food taken from army stores. These small offerings were more than calories. They were a promise that Szpilman would see another sunrise. The officer also brought a German winter coat, thick enough to hold back the worst of the cold. Szpilman wrapped himself in it the way someone might hold on to a lifeline. Every gift came with risk. Every visit tested the fragile border between duty and conscience. But Hosenfeld kept coming anyway. Inside that ruined building at Aleja Niepodległości 223, the two men rarely spoke long. A few questions, a few answers. Hunger had taken much of Szpilman's strength, and secrecy demanded silence. Still, something unspoken grew between them. Not friendship, not exactly, but a quiet recognition that both were standing at the edge of a choice neither could undo. Outside, Warsaw lay in winter's grip. The uprising was over. The city had been emptied, burned, and left as a skeleton of brick and soot. German patrols searched the ruins for stragglers. Food was scarce, even for soldiers. Szpilman heard distant footsteps almost every night, each one a reminder that survival hung by a thread. Hosenfeld understood that risk better than anyone. In his diary, he had already written that what Germany was doing to Jews was a crime. He knew helping a Jew meant death if discovered. Yet each day he looked at the starving pianist, and the choice felt simple. Either he carried the weight of another man's death, or he carried the risk of saving him. Days turned into weeks. The Soviet army was drawing closer from the east. German units were preparing to leave the city. The end of the occupation was near, but endings in war were never gentle. Hosenfeld's last visit came with hurried steps. He told Szpilman he could no longer return. He left food, clothing, and a final reassurance. You must survive. Then he stepped back into the ruins and disappeared with his unit. In the quiet that followed, Szpilman sat alone again, wrapped in that heavy coat, listening to the distant thunder of artillery. He didn't know if he would live to see liberation, only that a stranger had given him a chance. And sometimes, a chance is the only thing a person needs. January 17th, 1945, a bitter winter dawn for a broken city. Wilm Hosenfeld, the German officer whose quiet mercy had sheltered lives, found himself surrendered to the Red Army. His small unit, retreating from the ruins of Warsaw, was caught near Błony, 30 kilometers from the city. He became a prisoner. First placed in a special officers' camp near Minsk, Hosenfeld endured 6 months of solitary confinement and multiple interrogations by the NKVD. Accused of espionage or intelligence activity simply because he had been an officer. After his release to the main camp, he managed to send letters home. In one, written in 1946, he listed the names of people he had saved, among them the Jewish pianist Władysław Szpilman, and begged his wife to reach out to them, hoping their testimonies might help his release. Survivors he helped, Szpilman, a man named Leon Worm, and others, attempted to plead in his favor. Worm and Szpilman sent petitions. Yet their words could not overcome the suspicion that haunted former German officers. To the Soviets, uniforms meant guilt. In 1950, a tribunal in the Belarusian SSR officially sentenced Hosenfeld to 25 years of forced labor. In August 1952, worn down by harsh camp conditions and brutal interrogations, Hosenfeld died in a prison hospital near Stalingrad. The cause, rupture of the thoracic aorta. He was 57 years old. His dreams of recognition, of justice, died with him, or so it seemed. Decades passed. Few knew the full story. Many turned away. Then in 1998, Szpilman applied to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem, to have Hosenfeld recognized as righteous among the nations. After review of diaries, letters, and testimonies, Yad Vashem awarded him the honor on February 16, 2009. Poland also honored him. In October 2007, the late Lech Kaczynski awarded him the Commander's Cross of the Order of Polonia Restituta. His name lives quietly in history, not as a hero of grand battles, but as a man who chose to carry another man's life on his conscience, even when the world told him otherwise. But still, many questions remain. How many did he save? How many stories remain untold because records were lost, people vanished? The silence around those unknown names is deep. And in that silence, Hosenfeld's last act of resistance echoes, a plea for memory, a whisper against oblivion. For years after the war, Wilm Hosenfeld's name drifted in the shadows, known only to a handful of people who owed him their lives. There were no statues, no documentaries, no grand speeches. Just quiet stories passed from survivor to survivor, like small lanterns carried through a dark corridor. Władysław Szpilman never forgot the officer who handed him bread in a dead city. After Warsaw was rebuilt and his music returned to the radio, Szpilman tried to reach Soviet authorities, asking them to reconsider Hosenfeld's case. Leon Worm, the young man who escaped a Treblinka transport, tried as well. Their letters were real, heartfelt, and helpless. None reached the desk that could have saved him. Decades later, as Poland opened archives and families searched for lost histories, Hosenfeld's wartime diaries resurfaced. Page after page revealed a man struggling against the tide of his own army, describing what he saw in Warsaw, condemning the killing of Jews, and writing openly about guilt that kept him awake at night. These diaries became a kind of witness long after he was gone. Slowly, people started to look again. Historians traced the names he had written down. Survivors confirmed stories once told in whispers. And something unusual began to happen. A German officer from the occupying force, the very image of the enemy to so many Poles, was being remembered not for cruelty, but for conscience. In October 2007, Poland honored him with the Commander's Cross of the Order of Polonia Restituta, recognizing the lives he saved in Warsaw. 2 years later, on 16th of February 2009, Yad Vashem named him righteous among the nations, joining the small group of Germans who risked their lives to protect Jews under Nazi rule. To some, these recognitions felt like late justice. To others, like a moral knot, a reminder that human beings do not fit neatly into categories of villain or saint. Hosenfeld had worn the uniform of an occupying force, yet he used what little power he had to shield the vulnerable. And that contradiction still unsettles and inspires in equal measure. His legacy lives in quiet places, a museum plaque, a line in Szpilman's memoir, a mention in a classroom, a family that exists because one man chose not to look away. Even now, his story raises a soft, uneasy question that lingers long after the last page. How many others, hidden inside the machinery of war, carried the same conscience but never found the courage or the chance to act? There's a quiet moment that comes after every war story, when the noise fades, and what's left is a single human face. For some, it's the survivor. For others, the rescuer. In this story, strangely, it's both. Wilm Hosenfeld never planned to stand out. He wasn't a commander shaping battles or a politician shaping nations. He was a school teacher in a uniform, swallowed by a system that tried to strip men of choice. Yet in the middle of a world collapsing into hatred, he kept reaching for something simple, decency. Not the loud kind, the kind that slips bread into a starving man's hands, the kind that risks punishment to protect someone you barely know. When people look back at the Second World War, the scale of suffering can feel too large to hold. Millions of names, countless losses, entire cities wiped clean. But stories like Hosenfeld's remind us that history is also made of single decisions, taken in small rooms, on cold nights, when no one else is watching. That is where character shows itself. His choice didn't undo the war. It didn't save a nation, but it saved a life. And through that life, music returned to the world. Families were born. Memories were carried forward. A single act of mercy, in a place built for cruelty, rippled farther than he could ever know. It's easy from a distance to wonder what we would do in his position. The truth is simpler and harder. Most people follow the current of their time. Hosenfeld did not. And that refusal, that small stand inside a ruined city, is why his name survived the silence that swallowed so many others. His story leaves a soft weight in the chest, not sorrow exactly, not comfort either, something in between. A reminder that even in the darkest systems, individual hands still make choices. Individual hearts still feel the pull of right and wrong. And sometimes one quiet choice is enough to keep a light alive in a place where light was never meant to survive.